Good afternoon. I'm Al Borrego with the Cultural Heritage Society of the Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, a new organization here in West Texas, and we're glad to have you all here to enjoy our very first webinar on our series this year, Awakening Our Cultural Heritage. Here on our first day is Gary De Leon, who will be covering the descendants of the Onate Expedition, a very interesting topic for us indeed, and something that we enjoy as part of his Facebook page on a daily basis. I'd like to introduce him. Gary De Leon is here with us now. Hope you all enjoy it. I'm sure you will. Gary?
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Al, and welcome everybody. I'm glad to see so many people signed up. I know I'm excited about talking about my my ancestors who walked with Oñate on the expedition, and that's what we're going to cover today on the expedition, members of the Oñate Expedition. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so guys, if we're looking at why everybody's interested in the past and the Oñate Expedition, family members, if you look at a lot of the shows that are on TV today, many of them deal with genealogy, like Finding Your Roots by Henry Louis Gates. Some of you may have heard about the Genealogy Roadshow, or Do You Know Who You Are? Also, many of us have looked at things like Ancestry.com. I know I've got an account on that, and Family Search. I've used some of the other sites also. So there's a lot of information out there where people are looking for their family past. And this has really become a big thing. I know that in the old days when my grandma was looking up the family past, she had to go to Salt Lake City and there really wasn't much help. But with the use of the internet and more of this information on TV, people have really found this to be interesting. And they've been looking at this more. When you think of the Oñate Expedition, all you have to do is look around the area in El Paso, and you see things like signs, like the El Camino Real sign, and there's also a sign that says Path of Juan Oñate Trail. You can go to, this is the picture there of the Oñate sign. Is an official marker there, is on a rest area outside of El Paso on your way to New Mexico. And you even have markers such as the one at the bottom left, that's near the old Hacienda restaurant. And you got buildings named after Oñate, such as the Oñate High School in Las Cruces. And of course, we have the tremendous statue, beautiful statue, by our airport. I think it's 36 feet tall, if I remember right. It's just absolutely beautiful statue. And then, of course, you also have the conferences that I know San Elisario has run these conferences, and so has Isleta. So we see a lot on Oñate here in our area. You also see this if you go further into New Mexico. They have pageants and festivals. They also have their signs over there. This is a picture of a festival at Española, New Mexico, a few years back. And I've been to one of the festivals there at Española. It's a huge festival. This has also been a source of controversy dealing with the Oñate Expedition this past year. And here's a picture where the folks were protesting this. And they'd actually taken down one of the Oñate statues in Albuquerque. So this has been in the news, and that's probably the reason why so many people are interested. Well, it's an honor to speak to you this afternoon, and thank you, Cultural Heritage Society of Camino Real de Adentro. I have 13 ancestors who went on this expedition. Several of my ancestors were also on the reinforcement group in 1600. So I've been researching this for 8 years. Okay, and just get tell you what we're going to cover today. Let me see, did I skip one? No. What we're going to cover today, guys, is I'm not going to go through the controversies of the Oñate Expedition, but we're going to cover the background on the expedition, why they came and what they hope to get out of this expedition, the background and some demographics of expedition members that I looked at and analyzed. I haven't seen some of this information on the internet before. And then I'm also going to go through the stories of some of my ancestors and give you a little side notes and stories to this, some things I think you'll find very interesting. Give you a little background on myself. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I have to tell you guys, my knowledge of Spanish is limited. We didn't speak that much Spanish in Milwaukee, and so I didn't bother to learn. I wish I did now. It really is something that I wish I knew more about. My Aunt Pat on my mom's side was a genealogist, and she always told us stories about the past. My grandma, who's pictured there, she would tell me a few stories, but she tended to tell me more about her husband than herself. And really, this information we're getting from is more from her side of the family. I've been a social studies teacher for 35 years. I've taught in Houston, Milwaukee, and the last 27 years I've been at Canutillo High School. And I've been a social studies teacher. I've taught everything from Texas history, US history, world history, economics, and government. So that's been my area. I've also coached football and track and some other things. So I've stayed busy within the school. I'm married. I've been married for 33 years, and you see a little picture there of the family. There's my son. At that time, he was coaching at Parkland, and he's now in medical school. My daughter's a teacher, and my wife. Okay. I started my genealogy work in 2013, and I probably should have started earlier. In 1986, when I graduated, my grandma she didn't send me. I went to see her in Rapid City, and we went to a postmasters conference. And this is like for the retired people, for retired postmasters. And she introduced me and embarrassed me. And she said, Gary is a history major, and he's going to write the family history book. Will you do that for the De Leon family? Well, I promised in front of a bunch of people I was going to write this book. And it's hard to say no when you got a bunch of people looking at you. So I said yes. But, you know, for many years, I never bothered writing that book. I was just dealing with the family. And when she passed away in 2012, that's when I started doing my work. And I always remember Grandma saying, we must be related to some very interesting people, but I don't know who. And I really wish I had done this work and I could have shared this with her. So hopefully she's up there in heaven and she's happy with my research here. But I did eventually write a history of the De Leon family on the Sanchez Gallego side. And then later on, after I got done writing the book, I looked at the family history, and on my mom's side, I qualified to be a son of the American Revolution. I'm still waiting to hear from them, see if they're going to put me in. I've given them the paperwork. But I thought on my grandma's side, she must have some interesting things too. And as I did my research, I found the first thing I found out was that we were related to King Ferdinand. So I got excited. I started putting pictures of King Ferdinand up on my wall, and I told everybody I was royal. And Antonio Esquivel ruined that for me. By the way, he's one of our members of the Descendents Oñate Expedition Facebook group. But he's a famous genealogist and historian in New Mexico, and he said that on the Baca line, they could not have been related to King Ferdinand. For that to have happened, a 6-year-old would have gotten pregnant. And so that deflated me. I said, oh man, I thought I was related to somebody special. And I just about quit researching my family history line. And then as I was doing a little bit more research, I found out that one of my ancestors went with Oñate on the expedition. And I really didn't know anything about this expedition outside of seeing some of the signs here in El Paso. But that was exciting. Then I found out 2 or 3 more of my ancestors went with Oñate, and that really got me into my research again. And when I found out I had 12 of my ancestors that had walked with Oñate, I thought, well, there has to be something, a group that deals with this. And New Mexico had a group called First Families, and they used to give out certificates, but they had stopped. I would imagine it's a lot of work to prove that somebody is a descendant of something like the Onate Expedition. So I talked to somebody who dealt with this, and they said we just didn't have enough personnel to do the background check, so they stopped it. So I said, well, I got to do something. I got to be part of something, and I started this thing on Facebook, Descendents Oñate Expedition 5 years ago, and I thought I might get 20 or 30 people on it, maybe 100, but it just exploded. And today I have over 1,700 members, and it's growing all the time. So that's been exciting. And we put the background of the expedition members. We don't really deal with the controversies or when people start arguing was, is this right, wrong? We don't get into that. We let other people argue that. We're more or less trying to learn about our past and maybe help each other. If people are trying to find out about their past, their family members, this is a great resource. And there are some people that are just great experts on this. I've learned a lot from the people on this website. I've also done several other presentations before this one. Me and Al met in Española, New Mexico last year, and I gave my first presentation. That was a lot of fun. So that's a little background on myself. And I know, Al, did you want to, before we go on, did you want to have a talk about something?
I guess we could probably do a poll right now before we get going.
Yeah, go ahead, and if you want to do that, and then we're gonna look at the background of the expedition. Or did you want to wait on that?
No, let's go ahead and do a poll right now, and then we can start right after that.
So is this your first time attending one of our webinars? And if I'm not, I'm gonna put myself on there too. No, I can't. My answer would be yes. This for this group. What? Not right now. I think Al's.
How many people are there?
Right now we have 43. Do I have 43 or 45? Let me see.
I have 2 here. I have Patty Clemenson. Say hi.
Hi, Patty.
And I have Jaime Quintanar.
Oh, okay.
Say hi.
Big Jimmy, hi.
And there's a 3rd person that came in, but I don't know.
Woo, we're getting more people. Well, this will also be recorded, so if you want to see it later, and
yeah, we'll actually put it on our website. Probably by tomorrow, it'll be on the website. That's culturalheritagesociety.com.
That's great. And just tell me when you want me to get started. Do we have the?
Yeah, we'll give it a couple more minutes and make sure we got everybody in there.
I tried answering it myself. My answer would have been a yes, but it didn't take my click.
It won't take your click. It just shows you what we've got. We got 85% have voted already. Still got another few seconds to go here.
I do, and I think I'm not sure if it's over here. I don't know.
President Gary, this is so fabulous.
Who said that?
Okay, Gary, we're gonna go ahead and get started again. We thank you all for answering the poll question, and we'll get back to Gary DeLeon.
Okay. Okay, guys. So I'm gonna see. I'm gonna have to ask. Can you see?
We see an
Can you see,
island.
you see an island? Okay, so I got to go back to that. Okay, so let me give you a little background on the expedition as to where Oñate went. There were earlier expeditions that the people traveled to New Mexico, and they were looking for gold and silver. They didn't find any, but they did have tales of cities of gold there. Spain wanted to populate the area and convert the natives to Catholicism. And 3 men vied for the expedition. Oñate ended up winning the prize to be able to lead an expedition and colonize New Mexico. And Oñate, just to give you a little background on him, he was a wealthy son of a wealthy mining baron from the northern mining town of Zacatecas, Mexico, well, in New Spain. And he was one of the founders of Zacatecas. There was a two-year delay before Oñate could start. There were some political problems, some questions who was going to lead the expedition, but he finally departed from a small town called Santa Barbara. And I know this shows Durango and no, this one doesn't show Zacatecas, but Santa Barbara is about right here in Mexico. So they left January 26, 1598. That's, middle of winter. And you had 400 men, 130 brought their wives and children, 129 were soldiers. And I heard different sites that have different numbers. That's between 100 and 150 is usually where they're, it seems like 129 is the number I see most often. There were 10 Franciscan friars from the Catholic Church. And according to what the folks that said had written about this, there were 7,000 head of livestock and 83 carts. But there's been some question if they didn't inflate the number of head livestock a little bit. That'd been very difficult to try to travel with that many, try to keep them all in one place. But the colonists brought a lot of food to the farm once they got there. So they brought chilies, grapes, cattle. They brought cherries, pecans, almonds, walnuts, cherries, watermelon, peas, peaches, plums, apricots, figs, and apples. They also brought the livestock. They brought cattle. They brought horses. The other thing we look at that the Spanish brought, they brought their culture, their language. They brought tools to this area that they had never used before, like the weaving loom. So they brought a lot of, their culture. They brought a lot of things that had never been seen out in the Southwest. And of course, they learned from the Native Americans. There were things they learned so that they could survive in this area. Okay. When you look at the motivation, why did Oñate come to this area? Well, he'd get the title of governor. He'd be a captain general for 5 generations of all the land he discovered and colonized. So he stood to make some money. And the other thing, when you talk about a title, it would have been very difficult to get kind of the title you think of in Europe, kind of like, Sir Knight, or you get a Baron or a King, Prince. Those were hard to come by. And they liked that idea of getting a title. You get a yearly salary, the right to distribute land and collect tribute from the Indians in a system known as encomienda. He was supposed to get 30 leagues of land, and he would be able to tax the Indians on the land. And then he was also exempt from taxes. And everybody likes to be exempt from taxes. All right. At least I know I would. The colonists, if they went with him, they would be awarded the title of Hidalgo. They would be able to own land. They would be exempt from taxes, and they had the freedom of fear of being in prison for unpaid debts. So if you had some unpaid debts, this would be a great place to go. You don't have to worry about being put in prison. They were hoping to find gold and silver, and some of the colonists were conversos, possibly Jewish. We talk about that's what conversos were. They were originally Jewish and they converted to Catholicism. On one website, they mentioned there may have been Muslims. I didn't find any evidence of that in my research, but they were all trying to escape the Inquisition. And the Inquisition started in Spain, but some of it, they did have some parts of the Inquisition moving to Mexico, and eventually found its way to New Mexico, where people were questioning if somebody may have been Jewish or they were not following Catholic rules. Okay, when we look at the expedition length and time, this march was northward from Santa Barbara along the upper Rio Conchos. This took 86 days. They crossed 4 rivers before they got to current day San Elizario, Texas. And the settlers stopped for about a week in San Elizario. They rested up. And, during that time, they set up the first Catholic Mass west of the Mississippi River. And they had a huge festival and big feast where they had, first of all, a play, and then they had a big meal. They ate, they ate some of their native foods and some of the fish and the deer that they caught there. And some people called it the first Thanksgiving. They did not meet any Native Americans from the El Paso area, so it wasn't quite like what we think of as the Thanksgiving with the Pilgrims, but they did all of this well over 20 years before the Pilgrims came and landed on Plymouth Rock. Well, they didn't land on the rock; they landed that area. Then the settlers took off, and I should say that San Elizario at that time, that was on the southern part of the Rio Grande. And rivers, they have a way of bouncing around, jumping their banks. So the settlers moved west, and they were looking for a way to cross the Rio Grande. And this is where the Native Americans helped them. And they crossed near where the old Hacienda restaurant is. It's now closed. They crossed the Rio Grande at that spot, and that's where you saw that marker. So they crossed there, and they went following close to the Rio Grande, not quite right on the Rio Grande, but they went up north, and let's see, where was, May 4th is when they crossed in El Paso, and they arrived in near San Juan, New Mexico, July 21st. And the cart you see on the left side, this was at a rest area between Texas and New Mexico, and this would be a replica of some kind of cart they would have used. As I understand, this cart was just incredibly loud. These carts made a lot of noise, and you could hear them for miles around. When they took this trip, they averaged about 7 to 10 miles per day. Matter of fact, they had stopping areas every 10 miles. That folks who, as I understand, kind of a scouting group before them, kind of gave them an idea where they were going to go. Okay, and so when we look at the expedition, now we're going to look at a little bit about the demographics of some of the folks who came on the trip. They were a diverse group. You had young children, and it ranged to a warrior who was 60 years old. On one source, it said he was 66. But they came mostly from Spain and Mexico, but they also came from the Canary Islands, Balearic Islands, Italy, Guatemala, Portugal, Greece, and Cuba. And there was one volunteer from Flanders, which is modern day Belgium. I had to look that one up. I was thinking, Flanders, where is that? Mexico, you had a few Chichimeca Indian slaves, quadroons, mestizos, mulattoes, and a few Creoles. So you had a mixed group here. Gary Felix has put a list out on, he's done some research on the expedition members. And he said that talked about the men and their wives. And based on this is the number I came up with. I counted on his list that there were about 331 people that he was able to write about from the muster rolls. And a muster roll is just the Spanish wrote a list of the people who were coming. I don't know if I know they didn't have the name of the women, they didn't have the children. It may not have had all the natives, Mexicans, the servants on there, okay? But 23 wives, well, actually the 23 wives were listed. Although not by name, they would say they're taking their wives. Likewise, 41 anonymous children were tallied. And 15 of the men did not indicate the number of children. They would just say brought their family along. They also listed without names of 23 of their servants. In addition to this, there were 10 Franciscan friars. And how accurate it is, I don't know how accurate the muster list was. This was taken actually before they left. And assuming two children each family, that did not provide a tally, we're looking somewhere around 458 people. So maybe not all the servants were listed, and we may have missed a few. But these are some numbers I came up with. This is where I did the analysis, and I found some pretty interesting things as I looked at this. When you look at the numbers where people come from, 60% were actually from Spain. So we're getting the first generation, the Spanish who came over here. We have that one person from Belgium, the Flemish. Portugal, let me go to the second biggest, was Mexico. 97 came from Mexico. That's about 31%. So 9 out of 10 either came from Spain and Mexico. And the only really kind of like non-Spanish person we had besides the person from Belgium is Juan Griego from Greece. Okay, you didn't see other Europeans coming, but you did have 2 from Cuba, and Guatemala is probably mixed with Mexico, would be my guess. 19 people came with their family, 13 came with wives. So I don't know if that means 6 did not have wives. They didn't list it, but you can see that not a whole lot the guys came with the women. I would, if you just do the math there, you're looking at it, you're saying that there was 1 woman for every 20 men. So it was a strongly dominated by men, had a few women sprinkled in there. 2 children were listed. One was Oñate's son, but and that didn't account for many of them. Most of the people who went on this trip were between the ages of 18 and 29, about 60%. And then the second largest group is your 30 to 39-year-olds. So it's mostly a lot of younger people. You did have a few older ones. You had 2 people who were, excuse me, 60 years old. And you had actually 8 people, 50 to 59. And when I thought about this, I'm 58 years old, and I wondered, how could these older folks make this kind of trip? It was a very physically tough trip to take, and I don't know, I wouldn't be able to do it at this point. Okay, I know with my 2 fake knees, I don't think I could do that. And the number of soldiers I've seen range from 93 to 130. I counted 130. But 176 people brought armor. So that tells you that people who are not soldiers brought armor. And I guess that was available to the non-soldiers. 158 people had horses. So only about half of these people had horses. That would be my guess. Probably the women and the children didn't have them. And several people brought more than 1 horse. They had more than that. 10 people had servants, which tells me there are a few fairly rich people, and 17 were sponsored by Oñate himself. Where they didn't have the money, he paid for their trip. One interesting thing with the muster roll is they talk about the looks of the people, and it's kind of strange that maybe about half of them have a description. And then when they start talking about the descriptions of the people, there's a lot of focus on the hair color, the beards. I wouldn't have thought that would have been put in there. I don't know why it was put in, but they talk about people having black beards and red beards. A lot of people with red beards. I think I put that of the 58, 20 had black beards. I would have suspected, you think of the Spanish, I think of people with black hair, but it looks like the ones that they described, the majority of them had red hair. And it's kind of interesting how they explain the beards. Some were beardless. If they're beardless, they mentioned it. They have a light beard, scanty beard, a full beard, a rough beard. No, it almost sounds like somebody, you know, doing a runway description model of these guys. Then the other interesting thing I found is that, of course, you had the 12 missionaries, 11, you had 11 captains, 6 alferezes. So they picked their military leaders, and that's what the alferez, it's a lower leader than the captain. You had 2 sergeants, those would be the main guys. And the other thing I found to be very interesting about this is they listed 2 occupations. We don't know about the occupations of the other expedition members, but we do know there was an accountant and a treasurer. So this tells me that the Spanish really wanted to have a pretty accurate account on stuff, on numbers, on money, and on property. So to them, they thought that was pretty important. That's what I got out of having listed those 2 occupations. Now, Oñate in 1604 sent his brother to Spain to try to recruit craftsmen. So maybe they didn't have, first time around, they didn't have the people with the skills needed, and maybe he thought of, you know, once they were there, he probably thought, geez, we could really use somebody who works with metal. We need somebody to do some other work. So eventually they try to get more people in there to help out, okay? Not everybody stayed. Actually, most of the colonists left. But and I got this from Nancy Lopez. She has a great site on this too. She does a wonderful job. But what she mentioned was that 10 of these colonists were from Spain, 4 from Mexico, 2 from the Canary Islands, and 1 from Greece. So if you're wondering, you know, if you ever look at your DNA and it said you have some African in your DNA, it could come from Spain, because remember the Moors came into Spain and conquered Spain for about 400 years. But we did have some expedition members who came from the Canary Islands, and those are outside of the African area. They were controlled by Spain, but that's still Africa. The majority and this is something I found that I thought was kind of interesting, is the majority that stayed had families. And nobody who came who had servants stayed. So the guys that came with the servants, this is my own analysis of this, is the ones that came with the servants were probably looking for riches. And when they came to New Mexico, they didn't find any gold or silver. They actually found life to be pretty rough. That was not going to be easy. They decided to go back to Mexico. And none of the expedition members who were sponsored by Oñate stayed. So that tells you that what it tells me is, if you put money into it, you're going to stay. But those who, you know, they didn't put any money in, they probably thought, well, I didn't have anything to lose anyways, I'll just go back. But that one key part there that I noticed was the ones that had families stayed. So it tells me that they probably sold everything. They probably put all of their eggs in one basket. And when they got up there in New Mexico, they said, well, we can't go back. We might as well make the best of it while we're here. So kind of interesting. That's my own take on that. And that's where, if you're a history major, or you like history, you start analyzing things, and you think about these kind of, you know, you think about the data and ask yourself questions about that. In 1600, you had 6, by the time 1600 came around, you had 6 wives, 26 women were in total. Half of them were Indian, either Native American or Native Mexican women, and 2 were mulattoes. So that this is from the Southwest Crossroads, and they looked at, and I'm sorry, I should have written it down. There's a record that was taken of the women at that time, and they came up with that data. It's pretty interesting. Okay. Remember, most of your people just decide to leave already by 1500. They didn't stay too long. And you had the 1600 additions. This was in 1600. You had a second group come and help to try to help with as far as soldiers. They need some reinforcements. And many people left because of the lack of food. They had battles with the natives, rough terrain, there was no gold. And there were only 50 soldiers by 1600, so many of them had left. Some with families. You had about 8 Franciscan friars remained in 1609. So some had left, where they brought some more. I know a guy, my Captain Baca, had brought some more Franciscan friars. And that's why they were able to at least have 8 of them in 1609. They were surrounded by thousands of Pueblo Indians, as well as nomadic bands of Apache and Navajo that preyed upon the Pueblo community. So it was a tough life. And New Mexico's Spanish population was maybe 200 or 300 people at the beginning of the 1600s. And according to Antonio Escobar, he said that we may have had about 400 Spaniards by 1680, although I saw other sources that stated we had maybe as many as 2,000. And that's when the Pueblo revolt occurred in 1680, and most of the Spaniards were driven down to El Paso and a little further south. But eventually they'll come back and reconquer New Mexico. A little bit about colonial life. They lived next to the Pueblo natives, and they couldn't get goods from Spain very easily, or Mexico. With the Camino Real, when that was established, goods would come like once a year. So if you can imagine, if you really want something, your material is only going to come once a year. It's not like today where you get Federal Express and you can send something and get something the next day. Settlements were usually built on high land around a plaza with few windows facing out. They were closely packed. Most villages were erected, and you'd have only one gate to get in, kind of like a fort in a sense. And then they would have communal land where everybody had land where they could have their livestock eat the grass and such. And the communal land, that's part of the area that when the United States had taken over New Mexico, that communal land was taken, and the folks in New Mexico are still trying to fight for that land. They said that's part of our family's land that shouldn't have been given up. I have a friend of mine who he's written books about that, the New Mexico land grants, and where you got several families fighting for try to get some money back on that. Okay, so I'm gonna have Al give you guys another poll here, and then we'll get to my ancestors, expedition members who are my ancestors. So Al, do you want to give them another poll right now?
Sure. Let me pop one up here.
Okay.
And here we go.
I had a question. The first one was how many views? This is your first webinar. And this one is, are you an Oñate Expedition descendant? Oh, that's a good question. Are you an Oñate Expedition descendant? We put 3 of us here. Yay. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes.
Everybody's voting pretty good right now.
Good, good. And for those who say yes to this, or you're not sure, but you'd like to know, you're more than welcome to join our Facebook page of the Descendants of Oñate Expedition.
Right now, we're at 66% say yes,
All
26%
right.
say not sure. Only 9% say no at this point.
Well, I know there's interest in this, the expedition, just with everything that's in El Paso and New Mexico. You see the signs about the expedition.
Mhm.
And I don't know, I know Al has actually been on the trail before. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. Do they have signs in Mexico about the expedition?
Oh yeah, there's signs all up and down the trail. Every town has their own sign, and they all look alike. They have maps and everything along the way.
Oh, neat. Well, that's on the
You'll have
bucket
to go
list.
on our next little trip.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got about 15 seconds left here. And we've got 98%. All right, we'll go ahead and close this one, and you can get started.
Okay, so I will get back to, okay, the expedition members who are my ancestors. This is what I've found. And let me just click. Okay, the first ones I'll start with is Bartolome Romero and Lucia Lopez Robledo. And I also added Lucia's father, Pedro Robledo. And Bartolome, he was born in Spain, and he died in 1625 in Santa Fe. His son, Matias Romero, was born on the journey. So I can imagine having a baby while you're on that, they're on the cart, they're going to Mexico. That was probably not very comfortable. But he was born on the journey. And Lucia was born in Toledo, Spain, and she died in 1632 in Santa Fe. Her father was the oldest member of the expedition. I've seen 60 and 66 years. I'm not sure which one is the correct one, but he was born in Toledo, and he died in New Mexico near Las Cruces. And if you're taking I-25, you'll see the sign will say Robledo Mountain, and then they have like a little sign that shows this is the area where the first person on the journey died in the United States. So he immigrated from Spain in 1576. And this is kind of a picture where Toledo is. And Lucia was born in that area. Bartolome and Mr. Robledo lived only 25 miles apart from each other. But then the story gets a little more interesting. Bartolome, just to let you know, when they described him, they said he was of good stature, swarthy, which means good looking, okay, strong, black beard, and he was 35 years old at the time. He had some wealth, and we know that because he brought complete armor for himself and his horse. Not everybody did that. He had a cart with oxen. He had one plowshare, 3 coats of mail, which is to protect yourself from bullets and other things. 2 swords, a javelin, a lance, a hook blade, hibiscus, a pistol. He had 20 horses, so he had to be pretty rich. And he had some armor, and he had 6 mules. Now, he started as a low-level officer, and he served as one of Oñate's most trusted officers. He represented Oñate in his relationship with the Pueblo Indians, and he stood behind Oñate when other soldiers conspired to desert. So he was like one of the top people. Now, his family, they were a conversos family in Spain, and that means they were Jewish, and then they converted to the Roman Catholic religion. And at that time, when you had the Inquisition in Spain, you know, some of the Jewish people lost their businesses and their homes. There's questions as to the extent on how far the Inquisition affected the Jewish people, but many of the Spaniards who left Spain and came to the New World probably came to for some protection. They didn't want to worry about getting hurt. Okay. Pedro Robledo lived 25 miles away. He was a lay commissioner, and that means he was one of the people who was involved in the Inquisition and helping the Catholic Church. He may have known the Romeros. We don't know that, but that must have been a very, you know, this is where, as a history person, I look at this information. I think that must have been very interesting when Bartolome came to ask for Lucia's hands, her hand in marriage, and he had to ask Mr. Robledo for his daughter's hand, how he would have reacted. You know, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to hear that, and but it seems like he was okay with it. He let Bartolome get married to his daughter, and we do know that Pedro was struggling in Spain, that he's struggling making a living. His cousins were pretty well off. They were very rich in Zacatecas, and they had begged him to come to live there, and he did. So, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting side note there, that, you know, he was a lay commissioner and his daughter marries a converso. Let's look at Juan Griego. I've got that's more of a current Greek flag. That wasn't from 1500, but he came along with his wife Pascuala Bernal, and Juan was from Candia, Greece. At that time, it obviously wasn't called Greece, but he was born in Negroponte, Greece. He was a soldier for Spain, and he came to Mexico. He was married to Pascuala. They had 3 sons and 4 daughters, and one stayed with the name of Bernal. As Spanish custom is, one child would stay with the mother's name. That's something I didn't know before doing all this research. He was described as good statured, gray bearded. He had a big wound on his forehead, and he was 32 years old at the time of the expedition. And he was known as El Greco, which is the Greek. He testified in the Inquisition trials against people accused of being a Jew. For example, Francisco Gomez Robledo. And Juan Griego became an alferez, which is a military officer, in 1631. He married Pascuala Bernal. She was an Aztec woman, you know, from the Aztec tribe. She died in 1626, and her son, Juan II and Francisco, Juan II spoke the Aztec language. I want to say it's Nahuatl. I don't know if I said that right. And he was also an interpreter of the Tiwa language, so he was able to talk to the Indians in New Mexico. And he became an encomendero in New Mexico. The Griego family rose to heights of making money. They're a fairly rich family. And the Griego family was in New Mexico in 1680. Bartolome Griego was killed by the Santa Clara Indians in 1680. The Griegos, Miguel, lived in the Rio Arriba area in 1713. And the family members served in the Spanish military, and those descendants can be part of the sons and daughters of the American Revolution. So if your last name is Griego, or you know, if you find that is, you are, if they're one of your ancestors, if you have Miguel Griego, you would be eligible to be part of the sons and daughters of the American Revolution. Juan de Pedraza, I put him in there because he's from Spain. He was 30 years old at the time. He came from Cartaya, Spain, which is like on the border of Portugal. That was the closest I had in my family as far as somebody from Portugal. He was dark, tall, black beard. He had a wound over his left eye. I guess that was a way to describe him on the muster rolls. They would put down if they had some kind of marking. He was a soldier, and he was one of the founders of Santa Fe. They didn't list his name of his wife. That's one of the things I wanted to note, that the wife's name was not always put on the muster roll. He had his daughters, Beatrice and Isabel married Matias Romero. And this was something that happened with the colonists. They intermarried, and when you look at if you're doing your work on Ancestry.com or other places, you'll see these names just keep intertwining, and you got the Pedrazas, the Romeros, the Vacas, all intertwined there. Juan Lujan and Francisca Jimenez. Now they came from the 1600 editions, but I believe this is the one I wanted to show you because for two reasons. First of all, Juan Lujan was born in La Palma, the Canary Islands, and he came to New Mexico at the age of 27. And he came with his wife, Francisca Jimenez. She was a Native American. She was a servant who came with Lujan, and later on he married a servant. So this is something that the Spaniards did. A lot of times they brought a servant and married to him. And this is according to Chavez. He came in 1600. If you're wondering where the Canary Islands are, they're outside of this area by a little south of Morocco, by Mauritania and such. You can see that's out there in the Atlantic Ocean. Alonso Varela and Catalina Perez de Bustillo. With these two, Alonso and his brother came from Compostela, Spain. He founded a family, the Varela de Jaramillo family, and his brother founded the Varela de la Losada family. Catalina was born in Mexico, and she came with her father, Juan Perez de Bustillo and Maria de la Cruz. Now, the parents went back to Mexico, but she stayed with their husband. Alonso was described as 30 years old. He had chestnut-colored beard. He was good stature. They never said anybody was a bad stature. I always found that to be interesting. They'll say they're short or they're tall, but they never said somebody has a poor stature. He was a soldier. He's a captain on the expedition. Later, he became a lieutenant governor and was one of the founders of Santa Fe. So his great-grandson was Cristobal was part of the Reconquest, and Catalina was born in Mexico City. So several of them were born in Mexico City. Many of you have Hernan Martin Serrano as one of your ancestors, and doña Inés. And Martin Serrano, he was one of the major captains on the trip. He was from Zacatecas, and he came with his wife, doña Inés. Hernan was among one of the original settlers who came with Oñate. He is designated as the sergeant of the expedition, and they brought their family with them, as well as cattle, horses, utensils. He even brought a millstone. He's the only one I saw that brought a millstone. So, well, that becomes important. You got to grind the corn and grind the other stuff there. You need a millstone. He was first married to Juana Rodriguez, but later he was married to Doña Inés. We don't hear too much about Juana Rodriguez. Perhaps she died early on, and we just don't know. In 1626, he was 70 years old. He was considered the ancient settler and a resident of Santa Fe. He had two sons, Hernan and Luis. Maria Martin was most likely his daughter, also married to Alonso Martin Barba. Now, Doña Inés had an interesting story about her. Well, she appears to have been the same Taino, which is a native tribe, that named Inés, who was taken from the New Mexico when you had the Castano de Sosa expedition in 1591. So she was actually taken from the Indian tribe, and she returned to New Mexico with the company of Don Juan Oñate, and she served as a role similar to La Malinche, who accompanied Hernan Cortez. So if you're wondering what's La Malinche, That would be the woman who was a translator who helped the Spanish defeat Montezuma and the Aztecs. So she was the one who was able to accurately translate and tell the Spanish what the Indians were saying, what the Pueblo Indians, and that was a big help. Now this story, I find these two to be, especially Maria de Zamora, I think you'll find this one to be very interesting. Bartolome Montoya was originally from Catalina, Castilla, Spain, and he came to San Gabriel with his wife Maria de Zamora and sons Francisco and Diego and Jose, and daughters Lucia and Petonia. His wife and children were all from close to Mexico City. It's called Texcoco, Nueva España, which is, I put down near present day Mexico City. They brought 3 boys and 2 girls to New Mexico. Now, Maria de Zamora, this is where had a very interesting story. She was accused of witchcraft in 1607 by her son-in-law. And what happened was he claimed that she made a tonic for Lucia to kill her husband, Diego Robledo. Maria's daughter was only 12 years old and she was married to a soldier. I don't know how often that happened that a 12-year-old married a soldier, but obviously the mother wasn't too happy with the marriage. So she gave her daughter a poison that was meant to cut off water and give a bellyache, and giving you acute urinary retention. It would have killed him. But before Lucia gave her husband that medicine, I guess she decided, no, I'm not going to do that. And she told her husband, and they got Maria in trouble. So Maria had to go to court, their court at the time. And Lucia claimed that her mother took actions of the witches, and other neighbors accused her of this, accused her of doing things like kissing the hindquarters of a billy goat. Okay, that's kind of strange. Holding the witch's Sabbath and abusing peyote. She also made a tonic to make her son more attractive to women. My mother never had anything like that. But anyways, they claimed that she could rap on a wall and summon demons and walk through walls, of all crazy things. Well, Father Escobar is the one who moderated the trial. He judged the Inquisition case, and she was found guilty. She was banished from San Gabriel. She was kicked out, and she died within a year after that. But so my family actually was involved in the first witchcraft trial in North America. It's way before they had the witchcraft trials in Salem. We had them there in New Mexico. So that's a pretty interesting story. And if I got a little bit of time, I'm going to add one. I've added one more in here. Captain Cristobal Baca and his wife Ana Ortiz, they were not part of the 1598 expedition. They were part of the 1600 expedition, but they have so many descendants that I decided to add them in there. And both were born in New Mexico City, and they are the progenitors of the name Baca, and also anybody who has the last name Duran and Chavez in New Mexico. We're all cousins. Henrietta Christmas said that Cristobal and Ana have about 5 million descendants. 5 million, that's a lot. So most of you, even if you have on one of your ancestors is one of the folks from Oñate, you're probably also related to Cristobal Baca and Ana Ortiz at least 2 or 3 times. I know I am. And one of the ancestors was the New Mexico governor Bartolome Baca. He's interesting because he was one of the early governors, and he owned about 1.25 million acres of land, which is a huge tract of land. There's like maybe 2 or 3 people in the United States today who have more land than that. Well, anyways, these two came from New Mexico with 3 daughters and 1 son, and they had another son in New Mexico. And they were one of the few who did not leave San Gabriel. They were also, Cristobal was critical of the friars who advocated desertion, because some of the priests were saying we need to get out of here. He was, Cristobal really backed up Oñate to make sure that they don't do that. Okay, and if you want to learn more about the Onate Expedition, you want to learn a little bit more about genealogy, these are some of the sources I would highly recommend that you look at. Okay, we do have the San Elizario Genealogy and Historical Society. I also consult this book quite a bit, The Origin of the New Mexico Families by Fray Angelico Chavez. To me, this is the Bible of New Mexico families here. If you want to know information, you've got to get this book. The New Mexico Genealogy Society has a lot of good information, and they have seminars, they have monthly journals that you can get, and Hispanic Genealogy Research Center, I've used that. The Baca Family Historical Project, they have some information. Moses Garza, who heads Las Villas del Norte, he's been real good, and been a real good source of information. You can see videos, you can get some good resources into Mexico as far as getting genealogy information. So, and if you would like to look at my resources, you can see I've got a bibliography here. You can consult any of those things that I've looked at. Okay, so well, that was my presentation, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and I don't know if we've got some time for questions. I'm not sure if we do or not, but let's see.
We probably have a few questions.
Okay.
If you want, they can just type them into the chat area, and we'll look through. We've got a few on there already.
I'm going to see if I can maybe go to the web. I'm going to see if I can get off this and go to that. I'm not sure if I'll be able to. So let me see. Okay. And if you guys have any questions or any comments, I'd be more than happy to hear. I don't know if I can see.
Let me go ahead and before we go, we'll shoot out another poll question so that we might give somebody some time to type in some questions if they like. Here you go.
Okay.
Don't forget, if you answer no, that's really going to push us to do it. Just kidding.
Then we're going to call you. We're going to stop at your house.
There's only one person. There's only one person that said no.
Okay. We'll stop by, get some enchiladas or something.
Yeah. We're going to invite everybody to dinner. So I'm not seeing any question. Let me see. Okay. Okay, I'll stop the poll. And one of the questions is, what are quadroons?
Ah, that's a good question. That I know that in the Spanish, when you look at your levels, I know you have the first group would be pure Spanish, and then you had Spanish Mexican. Let me look up. I'm not even sure what a quadroon is. I saw it on the thing. Have you ever heard of that, Al?
It sounds like some kind of a military term to me. So I
No.
like remember seeing that like in the muster rolls.
Oh, a person who's quarter black. A quad.
Okay. Quadrones, yeah, I get it. That question was asked by Kimberly, I believe. And there's a question from Pedro Vigil Martinez. And that, did they have a blacksmith needed for the horses and to fix or make weapons?
Yeah, and I think 1604, Oñate sent more folks who had with expertise. They needed more people. So they didn't really tell us about any of the other occupations besides the treasurer and the accountant. So we just don't know. Unfortunately, I haven't found anything.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they had to have had some kind of barrier out there, especially along the way with the road so bad. Another question that you have on here is from, I think it's Mal Pacheco. And the question was, Francisco Cardino was sponsored by Oñate. He left, but did he leave his daughter behind? That was the question.
Okay, that's interesting. Because remember, some of the daughters went off and married other people. So there were some adults that did go, and then their daughters. But so it could have been she may have married somebody else and stayed with somebody else, and he left.
Right, that's probably the case. Lisa wanted to let you know that you did a typo on Esquivel's name.
On what?
There's a typo on Esquivel's names on the second entry, just for next time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
David Griego is here, and he said, how can you access the muster rolls for the Presidio de Santa Fe for SARS purposes?
I know they got the, did I put that on the reference? I know Gary Felix, his website is connected to the muster roll. He got his information, and of course they have, I don't have a way of going back right now, do I? Let's see.
Yeah, there's different ways to get those muster rolls. You can actually, I think you can actually type it into your search bar there, David, and it'll give you some really good websites for that.
Yeah, one of them is, I have it on the bibliography, the Entrada 1598 .com/MDIA Oñate names PDF. That's one of them. That's what I used.
And Albert Gallegos said he ran those names in his family search, and he had pressed, he didn't know if he was related, but now he wants us to put him on the yes I am, because he found his name in there. And Lisa asked if we were going to create a spreadsheet for people to check for DNA matches. That'd be kind of good. That's a good idea, Lisa. Let's see what we can do with that.
Yeah, I think that I know the New Mexico Genealogy Society is running a DNA. The person who's the co-moderator did her DNA and through New Mexico. I don't know. It was through New Mexico Genealogy Society, but they've done some of that kind of work with that group. But you know what? Let me, if you're on my Facebook page, we'll see if we can get an answer on that.
And that's Lisa Neighbors.
Okay.
And then Joanne Valdez, I think that's who that was that asked this question. Are you related to Peter De Leon, professor at Colorado University, Denver?
Oh, unfortunately, no. On the De Leon side, my grandfather came from Zacatecas, and he was the only son that survived. His brother died of the flu in 1907, and he had a sister who had passed away before he was born. And my grandfather came up to the United States by himself. He's trying to escape the Mexican Revolution, so he left Zacatecas after the big battle there, and he stayed in Juarez for a while. 1919, he left for up north, and he went to South Dakota to work on the railroads. So he's the only De Leon left as far as, you know, brothers and sisters. I don't know if he had any other any cousins that I haven't been able to get information on.
And Ramon, John Ramon Vigil said he was very happy to be here with us. Good to see you here, John. He's up there in Española.
Yes. Hi, John. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I hope they're able to do that festival again this year. We'll see.
Wouldn't that be great?
They have a great festival there, guys, in Española. I'd highly
And
recommend.
then, let's see, George Sanchez wants your Facebook website. So.
Oh, okay, George. All you have to do is type in the search Oñate, Descendants of the Onate Expedition, and it'll lead you right to it.
And I can send it to you, George, as well, so I can get it to you.
Great.
Linda Cuba said, great job, enjoyed it very much.
Oh, thank you.
Let's see, David was also asking about the Facebook name. Pedro Vigil Martinez, I didn't see the comment, but I'll look for it. Well, Pacheco wanted to know, Francisca was, that's about the daughter. And Lisa was answering the question, quarter African.
Oh, okay.
Any reason why you did not include the Duran y Chavez? That was Kathleen Jimenez asked that question.
I believe Duran y Chavez came later. They did not, if I'm correct on this, they came after 1600. They actually, their background goes to the Baca, Captain Baca I talked. Matter of fact, on the Baca screen, I said that Cristobal Baca and Ana Ortiz were the progenitors of not just the Baca name, but also Duran y Chavez, because their kids married one of the Durans. I don't believe, at least I haven't been able to find Duran and Chavez on the muster roll. Maybe I'm wrong. I'd be interested in that one if I could find that, because my grandma's one of the names in her family is a Chavez.
Monica Torres Rice asked if we'll be able to view this later. Yeah, you'll be able to catch the recording of this on the culturalheritage-society.com. That's culturalheritage-society.com website in the next couple of days. Just go on the website and you'll see where it's got in the archives. It'll be in the archives. Yeah. And then Paul Griego asked, why do you call it an expedition and not a colony?
I guess, and that's a good question. We used to call it the colonists, and I'll tell you, we got into so much people arguing about the politics of the name, and or if you say colony, I guess it got bad PR. And I thought if you say expedition member, had a better sound to it. And
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and I think you know, since it was an expedition from Santa Barbara all the way up into Okewenge, well, you know, there were people left along the way as well. They didn't just all go from one end to the other end. Others were left along the way. Then you take those people from the original expedition. They get run out in 1680. Extras come in 1600. So it comes to be just anybody that's part of the original expedition, I would say.
okay. Well,
And then let's see. We missed Thomas Bacchus cast for his vote in the poll.
oh,
We'll put it in there. And James Mountain asked, were there two Romero families or just Bartolome Romero?
from what I saw, just one. I just saw Bartolome on there. And then of course he had kids, and everything kind of sprung from the kids.
Mm-hmm. And then William Dries just asked, does the origins of New Mexico families contain trees, family trees?
He's talking about the book. They will go a little bit into the 1600s, but they'll mention who the names of the kids and the grandchildren are. That's about as far as they go. But it'll be a big help. It's a good book. I highly recommend. I think it's like $38 what I spent for it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Must have.
Let's see. Kathy Hercules asked, why are captains also called conquistadors? And I think it's because it sells better if you say conquistador. Yeah, I find it hard to imagine that 128 soldiers conquered anything.
Yeah, that's true. When you consider there were thousands of natives here.
Yeah. And then Patricia Duran y Chavez said, about 15 years I visited the site of the Spanish settlement in San Gabriel. That's great. 15 years ago, I'm sure she meant, or he. Kimberly Sanchez asked, do we know if Francisco Gomez Robledo was related to Pedro and Luisa Robledo?
That I don't have information. No.
Yeah.
I do know several Robledos come on the trip.
And I know Joseph Ricardo Danel from San Antonio asked, can we conclude that the Oñate Expedition is the very first official Spanish expedition in Texas and probably in the U.S.? And the previous were just scouting and early surveying?
I think so. I would. I think that's what made this one the expedition. The other ones they didn't stay. They just you had several different groups of people who came through Texas and New Mexico and just surveyed the area, but they didn't stay.
Right. And then he also established the Camino Real of Tierra Adentro, and that has to be sanctioned by the king to get that title.
Oh, okay. That's a good point.
We've got about 50 more questions. So I think we better cut it off here, but I'd like to add some of these questions to a follow-up page on the website, culturalheritagesociety.com. We'll add a special page for this presentation with some of the questions that were asked and maybe do some research on the questions themselves to see if we can answer them. And I want to remind you that on June the 20th, if I remember correctly, we'll be bringing Gary back for Descendants of the Onate Expedition 2, which will be another version of this, but with different insight. And we hope you all can make it to that. And don't forget, the Cultural Heritage Society is also putting on these types of webinars every month. And you can find those on the website as well. Be sure to register early. We do have a limit. I think we were up there pretty high today on the attendees. So thank you all for coming today, and we hope you have a great day. Thank you, Gary, so much for your hard work, and thank you for being there.
Yay. Well, thank you. Appreciate it. I really enjoyed it, guys.
Thank you all.
Let's see, who has the, I think you have the control now, right? Yeah.
That's good.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
You're very
That's. Al, do you have the control of it or me?
I think you do at this moment still. You still have the control.
Okay, so I'm gonna hit the stop sharing.
That's the one you went.
Hold on.
You can do this thing.